They attacked the friary and burnt it, killed 3 friars in it, and the abbot gathered up the rest of his brethren, put them on a boat, and as they left the town, he turned and put a curse on the town. He said that the river would take 3 lives every year. The woman waving goodbye, you can just imagine the heartbreak involved in that scene and the hundreds, if not thousands of times that it was replicated over the decades, the post-famine decades. Now this is the route that Patrick Kennedy would have taken on his way to work. This was the main road into the town. The bell that sounds here on the hour dates back. When you hear that sound, that is the same sound that was heard here in medieval New Ross. There's hardly a day goes by now that when you're passing here you wouldn't see somebody shaking his hand. This is the spot where 1963 John F. Kennedy spoke to the people of New Ross.
How's it going, lads? So today I was brought around New Ross in County Wexford for a guided walking tour of the history in the town. I myself am from about 10 miles away from New Ross, and I learnt more today than I have in my entire life. Myles offers loads of different types of guided walking tours, everything from medieval history to 1798 to John F. Kennedy's great-grandfather walking tour. Today he basically gave me a little taste of all the tours. We covered everything from 1798, War of Independence, Civil War, medieval history, bit on JFK, you name it. If you want to book your own walking tour with Myles, I'm going to leave the website here and also link it below. It's history.visitnewross.ie, and also I'm going to leave the Facebook page linked below, which is New Ross Street Focus. If you're in the area, I highly recommend booking a tour with Myles. He is an absolute wealth of knowledge, not to mention an absolute gent. As I said, I learnt more today about a town that's 10 miles away from me than I have my entire life. Hope you enjoyed the video.
Okay, we're starting our tour today here at the Emigrant Flame. New Ross has a place in Irish history mainly through, well, in recent Irish history, it's mainly through the famine era and the emigration that took place through the port of New Ross. The Kennedy family has, as we all know, have huge connections with this area, and it's from this key here that Patrick Kennedy, JFK's great-grandfather, emigrated in 1848 via Liverpool on his way to Boston. The Emigrant Flame here was taken from Arlington National Cemetery in the States and brought back here to New Ross in 2013. And it's a fitting tribute and a memorial to the thousands upon thousands of emigrants who left these quays on their way to greener pastures, hopefully, on the other side of the Atlantic. On the other side of the building here, up to recently, there were 3 ugly oil tanks. And in the past few years, they had been removed, and the site developed into this lovely little area here called the Emigrant Park. And again, there's a lovely statue here, carved statue of a lady waving goodbye to her family or relations as they sail down the river to greener pastures. The woman waving goodbye, you can just imagine the heartbreak and the hundreds, if not thousands of times that it was replicated over the decades, the post-famine decades. But emigration from New Ross was not new in the 1840s and 50s. Emigration from the New Ross area to east coast of America would have been from the late 18th century, particularly with Newfoundland. Yep. There's huge connections with Newfoundland and New Ross in the southeast. There was a family here called Keogh. They were originally a Quaker family, but great business people, and they had shipping lines that went from, on a seasonal basis, from New Ross and Waterford to Newfoundland for the cod fishing season. Yeah. And even a lot of people will know that the Wexford accent, the South Leinster Waterford accent is still quite prevalent in Newfoundland. That's right. And the story of our son is married and living in Halifax in Nova Scotia, and last year my wife and I visited him there, and I went for a stroll one day and went into a diner. Sat down and the waitress was there fussing over me, filling me full of coffee. She thought I had a hollow leg, and we got chatting. And in the middle of the conversation, she just turned to me and said, "What part of Newfoundland are you from?" And I started laughing. I said, "Why? Why do you think I'm from Newfoundland?" And she said, "Well, I'm from St. John's, and I have neighbours just down the coast, and your accent is the very same as theirs." So I told her the story then. The Newfoundland connection is still huge here, and there's a biannual trip which has been restarted after COVID. So hopefully they'll be over again now. I think it's next year that the Newfies are due here. So we just take a stroll up here. There's another significant thing which at the end of the garden here, which would resonate with the Kennedy connection. The Graves and Company pier there that has been restored, that was the pier belonged to the shipping company of the Graves family, and the Graves ships would dock there. The cargoes that those ships had would have been people westward, and the likes of timber from the northern ports, timber back eastward. So the timber would have been brought back here and unloaded on the quays of New Ross. From the southern ports of Savannah and places like that, you would have had tobacco and cotton as well brought in. But an interesting thing here, a phrase I use in my walking tours quite a lot here, is walking in their footsteps. These granite steps here are steps that were taken from the Graves family, the Graves and Company ticket office, which was just across the road here. When it was knocked down in 1977 for the construction of this roadway here, this road was only late 70s, added into the town. The quays actually finished down here at the Graves and Company pier at that time. So when the building called the Blockhouse, which has medieval connections, but the Blockhouse was where the ticket office was, and when it was knocked down, these stones were retained privately or recovered privately and donated to the council here recently with the construction of this emigrant park. So if you walk up these steps, and if by any chance you have a connection, a family connection, going an ancestral connection with an emigrant who left New Ross through the Graves Company. Now there were other companies here in New Ross like the Howletts as well, who had ships going to America with emigrants. But the Graves and Company, anybody bought a ticket there would have walked up these steps,
right, wow,
to buy their ticket and come back down it. So literally you're walking in the footsteps of your ancestors. And the next scene would have been the emigrant ship sailing down the river down towards Great Island, past the estuary, along the estuary, past Hook Head and out into the Atlantic Ocean. The council have been very good here with the use of storyboards around the town. They've done a lot of research, proper research as I would see it, and incorporated in Irish and English onto the storyboard. So anybody walking around can get a good appreciation of what happened on the site. What we're going to do is we're going to go up this way here. One thing about New Ross is that the layout of the town hasn't changed much from medieval times, and so much so that the streets have retained a lot of their history. And to keep it simple, because we're now going into a place called Priory Lane, because up here there was a priory. In actual fact, there was two priories. In the 12th century, there was a priory here, or a friary of the Crouched or Crutch Friars, okay, who have an infamous connection with New Ross. because of an event that happened here in the late 12th century, when a dispute happened between one of the friars and the townsman. It ended up in the townsman being murdered. They said the row was over money or a woman. Right. Not so sure which it was. But in any event, the townsman was killed. His buddies didn't take kindly to it. So they followed the friar back to the friary here. They attacked the friary and burnt it, killed 3 friars in it. And the abbot gathered up the rest of his brethren, put them on a boat, and to leave the town. And as they left the town, he turned and put a curse on the town. He said that the river would take 3 lives every year to make up for the loss of his brethren. And that curse was believed. It could still be believed today, but when I came to New Ross here first in 1977, we had an awful issue with suicides in the locality. And I remember an incident on the river when somebody went in and a person turned to me and said, well, that's the first of now, there'll be 2 more. And that curse was believed. There's another story about how the curse was lifted. But as a result of that, the town was excommunicated. The whole town, yeah. The Crutch Friars were sponsored or patronised by the Pope, so he didn't take too kindly to it, so he excommunicated the whole town. But the other thing about this laneway here is that emigrants waiting for the ships who wouldn't have had lodgings, they would have travelled and walked from all over the southeast. There's even the story particularly about Coolatin, the Coolatin area where the tenants, I think it's the Fitzwilton estate, were sent on paid passage from New Ross to America. And they would have come down here with carts and just walked the whole way down. They wouldn't have been able to pay for lodgings. So what they would have camped overnight waiting for the ships, whatever length of time to wait for the ship to depart. They would have set up itinerant-like camps or refugee-like camps in the laneways of New Ross, and this is one of the laneways that they would have been waiting for to depart. So we see the remnants of corn stores here. We can see the remnants, the doorways in the walls here. In 1815, the Roach family of Enniscorthy, corn merchants, decided to move their operations from Enniscorthy to New Ross, or a major part of it, because the Slaney was too shallow for their requirements. So they moved down here and they start building corn stores along the quays, some of which still survive up on the other side. But when they were building the corn stores here, laying the foundations, they discovered a graveyard. And that was the graveyard, the cemetery of the Crouch Friars, who were evicted from the town in the late 12th century. Okay. And rather than desecrate the tombstones, they loaded them up in carts and brought them up and deposited them within the walls of St. Mary's Church, the ruins of St. Mary's Church, the medieval church at the top of the town. So we have them up there. They're all preserved. Unfortunately, we don't know which is which because no inventory was kept. But we do know they're of New Ross and they're mixed in with tombs that were up there. But they've been preserved then. But that's an interesting story about that one. These buildings would have been here now when Patrick Kennedy was walking along this street in front of us. Over there was a meeting house of the Plymouth Brethren. And on this side as well, there was a Quaker meeting house. And in one of these houses, the Quaker meeting house on the left-hand side here, this is Priory Lane, but typical New Ross, it also had, at that time in the early 1800s, 1829, it was also known as Meeting House Lane, because there was a meeting house there for the Plymouth Brethren, Dissenters, and Sandemanians, I think they were called. But here's a Quaker meeting house. And in that house, meeting house, in 1829, the first temperance society in Europe was founded in New Ross by a guy called George W. Carr. Right. Great social activist. The Dissenters' meeting house was there, or the and the Quakers one was on this side. So unfortunately that's not in the best of condition now, but that would have been built in the 1830s as well. There was a lot of development went on in the town in the 1830s. The owners of the town were the Tottenham family, and in the 1830s they visualised a very, very prosperous port. Now there's an example of houses that were built in the 1830s, and on the back of it here you have the coach houses. They're still in use, but not a horse to be found. They built a number of these in order to attract professionals and business people into the area. This is one of the blue plaques that we put up. The excommunication was lifted in 1436, but the story about that is the town had fallen into decline, or the port, and the prosperity of the town was in decline. And the Bishop of Ferns wrote to the Pope asking him, is there any chance we could have this excommunication lifted, because the people of the town attribute the bad luck that they're having to the fact that this excommunication is still there.
Yeah.
But they discovered that the excommunication had been lifted about 200 years prior to that.
Okay.
But they never got the letter. It got lost in the post somewhere between Rome and New Ross. So, but it was lifted again formally in 1436. But that meant that at the time the sacraments couldn't have been celebrated in the town. But it doesn't tie in with 1436 in the sense that about 50 years after the Crouch Friars left, the Franciscans arrived in New Ross, and they took over the site that the Crouch Friars had.
Okay.
Now, the Crouch Friars, the reason that there was ill feeling between the Crouch Friars and New Ross, or the people in New Ross, was the Crouch Friars got the job of collecting river taxes.
River taxes?
River taxes, yeah. Most of these religious orders survived on patronage, and William Marshall, instead of slipping them a few quid every now and again, he told them, right, to support yourselves, you can collect the river taxes. Okay. So any tax collector and business people or ordinary people, they wouldn't be on the best terms, even though they were a religious organisation, and that accounted for the ill feeling between the friars. The Franciscans inherited that right as well, but I don't think they took to the collection as assiduously, let's put it that way, as their predecessors. But if the town was excommunicated, the Franciscans wouldn't come in. So there's a grey area there. So here we have these buildings that were built by Charles Tottenham, and there's an ad there, an ad for them in 1835. New Ross possesses the advantage of a cheap and excellent market, a daily communication with the metropolis, a mail coach from Waterford and Wexford every day, and also a steamboat every morning to Waterford, which returns in the evening. A bonding store which enables the grocers to sell all sorts of wines, sugars, teas, etc., considerably under the prices charged in most towns. The new roads in progress of making will render it one of the most desirable towns in the south east of Ireland for permanent residents. I mean, that's a bit of marketing there to get people into the town. And in this area here, you would have had the professional classes leaving or living. So, and then further down along there, you have similar houses that were built a few years later. Now, this is the route that Patrick Kennedy would have taken on his way to work. This was the main road into the town from the Dunganstown area at the time. So he would have passed along this street here by those buildings. Okay. They were here then. So then over here we have this building, which in the early 19th century was owned by the Howlett family, major shippers as well. That big one there, and there's something that will tickle your fancy here in this as well, for some of your recent podcast broadcasts. This was owned by the Howlett family, and in the early 19th century, it was a brewery. Okay. Right. We see the entrance gate there, and the brewery was down at the back. That was the main house and offices. But in subsequent years, it became an RIC barracks.
Oh, wow, right.
Right? And if you notice the little porthole up in the window, or halfway up the building, an observation point, a sentry would have been stationed with a rifle, which came into use in the War of Independence. And there's a similar one on the other side, looking up the other part of it. And that was attacked in 1921 by a number of detachments of the local IRA. April 18, 1921. A bomb was thrown in over the back wall. Detachments were set in a field just above there with sights on the RIC barracks. There was an exchange of fire, machine gun fire and rifle fire. And even to this day, we can see a bullet mark that hasn't been filled in yet there, just under the top window, to the left of the top window. You see it in it?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Right? Now, some of the other ones have been filled in. You can see, if you look through where they've been plastered in on it. And then there's more bullet marks on the other side. The 10th of February 1922, it was still occupied by the RIC and the Black and Tans. Things were calming down a bit just prior to the truce. And but what happened here on the 10th of February is a detachment of IRA came into the town, pulled up here, right, in full view of the RIC barracks, put up a flagpole there, and raised the tricolour in defiance. And of course a crowd gathered and there was great crack. The following day, the Black and Tans skedaddled, went to the station and got the train to Waterford. They got out of it. Then 2 weeks later...
They knew they were going to be raided?
Well, I said it might have been Black and Tans, but I don't think they were Egypts. They knew what was looming.
Yeah.
But then that was on the 10th of February, and then a fortnight later, the formal handing over of the RIC barracks. There was a process, parades and bands and whatnot happened that day.
Yeah.
And the flag that was raised that day, we have it still.
No way, really?
We have it, and I'll show it to you. So that's the courthouse. In the 1830s as well, that was built. There was a lot of development went on then by the town owners, the landlords of the town, the Tottenhams.
Right.
That name will feature prominently in any stroll around the town. We have here an institution that dates back to medieval times, a charitable institution called the Trinity Hospital. I said there was a lot of tenants in New Ross. Mightn't have thought that he adhered to that. But having said that, in any major fundraising effort that went on in the town in the 19th century, no matter what it was for, Catholic or Protestant, there was always a significant donation from the Tottenham family to it.
Yeah.
You know, so, but having said they looked after their own, which is hardly surprising, but by the same token, they would have donated the ground and built this. And there's another plaque over here which shows how far back this institution goes. These were built in 1772, but the actual institution itself, which it still survives. The goals or the mission of the Trinity Hospitals, these are still social housing. It was originally for poor and indigent housekeepers. So it was single, widowed, usually females with no support. We had another great incident here in 1922, or during the Civil War. In July 1922, a group of irregulars, as they were called, came from Waterford by train and took over the town. And they went around looking to commandeer lodging. And there was a Major Hamilton and his daughter were living in that house. He was a local agent and a member of the Harbour Commissioners. But some of the soldiers, the regulars, tried to gain entry there and he wouldn't let them in.
Okay. So
they broke the door down and Major Hamilton, or Mr. H.R. Hamilton, was a major. But anyway, he was having dinner with his daughter. So they burst in the front door, the soldiers, or the regulars burst in the front door, and he came out with a pistol.
Right.
And there's an exchange of fire. A couple of the soldiers, or the regulars, were wounded, and Hamilton's daughter was wounded. And it was beginning to escalate when one of the officers of the irregulars came over, who had commandeered the hotel here in town, come over and calmed things down and brought captured the Major Hamilton, and brought him to the hotel. But he was arrested and brought to Waterford. They moved out of town when the Free State Army arrived in the following day. They moved back to Waterford and brought Hamilton with him. Daughter was treated for the wound, and gladly she recovered. But he was brought to Waterford. He escaped and took a boat to Wales, and then stayed there for some time before coming back. But there was a major incident there during the Civil War. So that Royal Charter was given to New Ross by Queen Elizabeth I. So taking it back, and that charitable institution survives today. Now we have these buildings here, which adds to the architectural heritage of the town. They date from around the 1850s, but the doorways, the design of the doorways the arch at the top of it is called a Morrison doorway, and it's quite common locally. It's more common in New Ross than it is in any other town in Ireland. We see it in the significant buildings all across there. We see this Morrison doorway design, and it's commented on in the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage. But again, Kennedy would have walked this street and passed these buildings. This building here is St. Catherine's Chapel of Ease. Again, it was built on ground donated by the Tottenham family. Okay. It was a chapel of ease, basically for the established church members, or the Church of Ireland members, living in the downtown area, in the professional and merchant living quarters. Peculiarly enough, it went bankrupt within 4 or 5 years of being established.
Right. And
there's an advertisement around that time in a newspaper in Bristol seeking funds to clear the bankruptcy that had been inflicted on the local Protestant community by the Catholic merchants of New Ross. In other words, they called in their debts and they were being ridiculed for it. But that's the history. It subsequently became St. Catherine's primary school, and now it's a solicitor's office. Again, 1916, War of Independence. This shop here was the home and the shop of Joseph McCarthy, who was a commandant here in the Volunteers in 1916. See the stone on the corner? They're around the town. I'll point out a few more of them to you. They're called jostle stones, but they were there to save the corners from the wheel hubs of carts taking the corners and hopping off the walls. And you thought you knew it all?
No.
Now, what was the name of the landlords of the town? Yeah. So this is the building in which the landlords of the town, the Tottenham family, lived. This was their townhouse.
Okay.
A significant building in the town, and Patrick Kennedy's landlords.
Patrick Kennedy's landlords?
Yes. Well, his father's landlords.
Yeah.
And I believe a rent demand by the Tottenhams instigated his decision to finally move out and head for the States. This is St. Michael's Theatre. But when Patrick Kennedy was alive, this was the parish church.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
1806 to 1902. The new church that's up there was opened in 1902. 1806, the parish church moved down from where the Augustinian church is now because of a row with their landlords,
okay,
who happened to be
The Tottenham.
Tottenham's.
Right.
So they moved down here and they set up the parish church here, directly in front of the Tottenham townhouse. It didn't go down well with Mr. Tottenham at the time. A name that happens quite a lot here is Charles Tottenham, and people might be forgiven for thinking it's the one guy. It is not. There were several of them. It was a family name, and even the Tottenhams represented New Ross through the decades in the Irish Parliament and in the Parliament in Westminster, and there were 6 Charles Tottenhams represented New Ross in Parliament. So that will tell you. When we pop inside into the Tolsel, you'll see what that's like. But this was the parish church. If Kennedy had to attend Mass here for whatever, be it, well, he probably would have gone to Mass in Ballykelly, but if he was attending Mass here in town or a religious service, this would be where he would have attended. The parish church was built on the site of an Augustinian friary. The Augustinians arrived in New Ross in the 14th century and they built a friary here, which was subsequently bought by Edmund Spenser, the renowned English poet, the Fairy Queen and whatnot. He bought it. What we have here is reputed the remnant of one of the walls. A noted local historian, Patrick Donovan, of the 1940s, has said that he was convinced that this is a remnant of the original 14th century Augustinian friary. It was along this site here. And in the wall here then we have a plaque to a son of New Ross, Michael O'Hanrahan, born in St. Mary's Terrace, which is a building just up there. He lived here until the age of 4. His dad was a cork cutter and from Wexford town, but he moved on at the age of 4 to Carlow. He probably worked for one of the breweries or the bottlers here in the town. I can't find a record of who he worked for, but Cherry's Brewery would have been a major employer at the time, and a lot of merchants would have bottled their own beers. They would have got the kegs or the barrels of beer and then bottled their own. So there would have been the demand for his skills in the locality. And the house on the right-hand side up there is where he was born. This area is now, beside the brown door, the one facing this way. But this area is now being developed. It's under construction and it's going to be developed into a sort of public performance area. There will be a memorial, another memorial to O'Hanrahan, is a plan for it here. There'll be sheltered area here, sort of an artisan hub type thing as well, but it's all been developed and tidied up, and hopefully in the next year or so it'll come to fruition. Again, the council working diligently on that. There's a throwback to medieval times which isn't really obvious to a lot of people here, in that the jagged street front. If you see here, the building sticks out, right? Yeah. If we go around this corner, just along here, the same thing happens. Whereas it's much more refined on the far side of the street. So these are the older buildings on the sites that they would have been come down through the centuries and the generations. And again, we have it here, the jagged. And we have our jostle stone on the corner. And this again is one of the laneways that would have led to the quay. And this little laneway rejoices in the name of Lady Lane. Okay. I leave it to your imagination as to how it acquired that name.
I can imagine.
But New Ross was a port town, so. And then one of the little beauties of New Ross and the commercial heritage is our friend over the door there. A wonderful piece of 19th century merchandising. The merchants that were there were Armstrongs and Merry's was another name for the people who traded there. There were merchants who, high-class grocers, wine and spirit merchants, and also tea merchants. In the 19th century, tea was imported from China and blended here. And a lot of the merchants would have taken pride in the quality of their blends and advertised it as such in the papers and offered it for export. Our special blends. Perfect. Our special blends, and send it anywhere in the world postpaid. And this was a piece of merchandising. Up to recently, the 2 glass boxes had China tea written on them. But it fell down a couple of years ago, and again the council took it away and had it repaired and restored. So it's still part of, you know, the heritage of New Ross. Here we have again another example of this idea of using a building that's not in use anymore. It's a great simple idea, and it's from the Kavanagh collection, which was donated by Jimmy Fitzgibbon, God rest him.
That's a great idea.
But these are scenes on the quays, and that's this street here.
That's the street we're on.
That's the street we're on, yeah.
Looking up that way.
Yeah.
I love things like that.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And that's the scene, the barges. Those are the barges that came down from up the river. The big ships come in here and unloaded on the quay, right? And that's one of the cranes belonging to the Graves Company, unloading a cart there. They would have been used within the Graves factory, because they had a track running from the top of the factory down to the quay, and they would have unloaded here. And then the barges from like Carlow, Athy, would have come down here and unloaded on the Barrow Navigation. Now we walked up that street. Oh no, we didn't. We looked down it. That street with the coloured windows, or the coloured houses.
Yeah.
That's been knocked down there. The supermarket is there in its place. So here we have Conduit Lane. Derives its name from, there's a clue in the name, because the town conduit or water tank was here. It came down from a stream at the top of the town and filled up here. But there's a great story about Art MacMurrough was here in town in the 16th century, and one of his retinue was here washing a hat of cherries, it said, in the town conduit when he was accosted by 2 local men and murdered.
Right.
And there was a row happened and a couple more were killed, but the perpetrators were captured by the town corporation, or the watchmen of the town corporation, and tried. But MacMurrough didn't take kindly to it and set upon preying upon the town for ages afterwards. But here again we have the murals put up again by the town council. They're contemporary Norman scenes, hunting scene here with the hounds. We have here a depiction of pheasants that were brought into Ireland by the Normans, and the fallow deer brought in for hunting along with rabbits. So these are quite literal. We have the town crest here, a depiction from a scene witnessed by King John when he visited New Ross in the early 13th century. The stag being followed by the hound across the bridge. So that's the town seal, and have a depiction of it here on the town crest on this little pin. And again we have this wonderful mural here, my out and out favourite, of William Marshall and Isabel de Clare. I think it's a wonderful one and a great photo opportunity for anybody visiting. Again, scene of a lady picking flowers and kids playing as well. the connection of the local to that piece of art, I think, is every bit as important. If they don't connect with it, I think a lot of it is wasted. So here we have the Tolsel, the seat of government here in the town. And again, we have the anomalies of Irish history here, because up here on this, there's a plaque that says to the memory of Michael O'Hanrahan, executed in 1916 leader. Okay. In the middle, we have a memorial in Latin to James Warren Doyle. It was erected in 1934 on the centenary of his death. James Warren Doyle was a great social activist and fighter for Catholic rights, friend of Daniel O'Connell's, but he was more famously known as JKL, the great JKL, James of Kildare and Loughlin. He was the Bishop of Kildare and Loughlin, but he was born in New Ross, an Augustinian priest, and that was erected in his memory there. Up here, we have another one, a plaque to the memory of the Reverend James Cullen. He was a Jesuit, and he founded the Pioneer Total Abstinence Association.
Right, okay.
Right? So I mentioned to you earlier that we had the first temperance society in Europe founded down the town. But then we had the Pioneer Total Abstinence Association, also founded by a New Ross man.
Okay, right.
So total abstinence meant you couldn't touch alcohol.
Yeah.
Temperance was different, and it was they took an oath to abstain from hard liquor.
Right.
1829, it was probably safer drink beer than it was the water.
Yeah.
So that was it. So you have those anomalies, well, you have those there, but then the ultimate anomaly, and we're just a couple of days late, the first stone laid July the 1st, the anniversary of the glorious Battle of the Boyne.
Okay, yeah.
You need a close-up on that one. And if we look at the names, this building erected 1749, Charles Tottenham Esquire, sovereign.
Okay.
Right? John Cliff, recorder. Then Charles Tottenham and John Lee, members of Parliament.
Okay.
So that'll tell you the glorious Battle of the Boyne. Yet if you turn around this side, standing there with his fist up in defiance is a 1798 rebel. But when the committee inspected it, they found one flaw in it.
Right.
When we were in the laneway below, I just showed you that the crest of the town was the stag and the hound.
Yeah.
If we look at the crest on the monument, there's no hound.
Okay.
So you can imagine the committee when this was unveiled first. And they were here looking at it, and one fella going to the other, Tommy, look, the crest.
Yeah.
What's wrong? There's no hound. I said, say nothing, big grand. Now, the piece de resistance. These are the two maces that we have of New Ross. That's the 1699 mace, the Charles II mace, presented to the town by the Earl of Anglesey. Member of the family name was Annesley, a family famed in history, not least by Robert Louis Stevenson, and he based his book Kidnapped on a fellow who was born here in New Ross, James Annesley. That was donated to the town at solid silver, 1699. But the other one, the Edward III mace, 1374. So if you want history, we got it here. But there's another mace that's in the Waterford Treasures Museum. It was taken from New Ross in the 16th century on foot of a row that was going on between the ports of Waterford and the port of New Ross. They came up here and they raided the town. They got a crowd of foreigners, mercenaries to load up with them, come up and attack the town, and they took the mace as ransom. At the time, it was valued at around £20, I think it was, which would be about 20 grand, 20,000 euro now. Right. Well, and I'd say it was just the silver value of it. But here you can see we have on the walls of it here is a homage to the Kennedy connection. One of my favourite things in here is the list of sovereigns and mayors and chairmen of New Ross Corporation and Council since 1660. You've heard the phrase rotten borough, yeah, right? This is an example of it at a local level, because all you have along here is Tottenham Lee, Tottenham Lee, Tottenham Lee, Tottenham Lee. Yeah. It's a bit like Lanigan's Ball. He stepped out and I stepped in again. Yeah. Right? The Lees were related to the Tottenhams through marriage and money, I suppose, and religion. Now, I mentioned to you earlier about the flag that was raised in 1922. That is the flag that was raised when the RIC barracks was taken over here in the town in 1922. And that here is a 14th century representation of the town of New Ross. The town was walled in 1265. The merchants of the town were getting a little bit annoyed at how vulnerable their assets and their businesses were. That's the site of Marshall's Bridge, built in 1210. A major engineering feat, an oak bridge across a river of that expanse. And that was Bridge Street, the high hill, which we'll see shortly. And we're about here, right? So there was a market there and a market there. And what that did then, the walling of the town really emphasised the two distinct identities. Those who lived inside the walls, which were mainly Anglo-Norman, and those who lived outside the wall. And that area now is known as Irish Town. Same as in Kilkenny, yeah. Exactly, so you knew who lived there. But like the layout of the town hasn't changed to any great degree since then. The Tolsel now is there. Prior to that, it was in the Franciscan Friary, the remains of the Franciscan Friary, which we passed there earlier on, and it was moved over there. The new Tolsel that we're in now was built in 1749. It was recorded that the bell that was down there was brought up and installed in the building here. The bell that sounds here on the hour dates back. When you hear that sound, that is the same sound that was heard here in medieval New Ross. Okay. So, I mean, is it the actual same bell? It is reputed to be the same bell. Yeah. I was asked to go and look at it a few years ago when I highlighted this instance. And I was asked, what do I think? And I saw the bell. And I said, yeah, it's definitely a bell. Because I have no qualifications to say one way or the other. But like eminent historians, local historians have said that before, like Patrick Donovan, who is the go-to guy here from a history point of view in New Ross from the 1940s, had mentioned it, and others then who believed them repeated it. But it's like a lot of history, and you'll appreciate this. When people dispute things like that, my answer is, I don't know. I wasn't there that day. Yeah. You know, so I'm only going on what I was told. One thing now, when I'm here with kids, I mean, this is the mace, the sign of the authority of the sovereign of New Ross. You know, 1699, and trying to get across to 15 and 16-year-old kids how old this artifact actually is. Yeah. I say, you're looking at me and you say, that fella is old, but, you know. It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. That is a map that represents the Anglesey family holding in the town of New Ross. That would have been, what's on the top of it there, 1687? Yeah. So that's the plots. That would have been their rent book, so to speak. All the all their property is numbered. We can see down here where I said to you we passed Charles Street, and that was 2 streets. So there's 2 streets there at the time. So that was knocked into one by the Tottenhams. There's no bridge on this, so there was no bridge in 1687. The history that's in here, like we had Teddy Kennedy III here, the great-grandson of JFK in here recently. I've had a few famous people, a couple of TV personalities and that sort of thing in here, politicians from all over coming in here. There was a guy called Kevin Vickers, he was a Canadian ambassador here a few years back. He was claim to fame was during a terrorist attack on the Parliament in Ottawa. He apprehended the terrorist, and as a reward he was made ambassador to Ireland. But I remember here a few years ago with a visiting group from Newfoundlanders, there was a reception here, and he got up and he made a speech here in this room that had the Newfoundlanders in tears. Right. He got up, I welcomed them. I'd like to welcome you home, he said. And everybody was stunned. He really, really felt it, and he was near to tears himself here because he just suddenly appreciated what coming back to the land of their forefathers and ancestors was. And I remember going across the road afterwards to a pub, which unfortunately is no longer in existence there, Hanrahan's. And we sat around, and the Newfoundlanders were really moved. And they put him sitting down, and they sang a sea shanty in his honour, and there was tears in his eyes. I must say it was one of the most moving experiences I've had, you know, with situations like that. But like all the big personalities, the visiting politicians and foreign representatives that are brought to the town are brought in and entertained in here in this room. So. The Ansleys were the Earls of Anglesey who gave that mace to the corporation here in 1699. But after the Battle of the Boyne, James II rested here on his way to Duncannon when he was fleeing after the Battle of the Boyne. No way. He rested there, stayed overnight, and went to Mass in St. Mary's Church, which is reputedly the last recorded Mass in that church. Wow. It had been a Protestant church from the time of the Reformation, but had hopped in and out according to the political feelings of the time. It went from Catholic to Protestant and whatnot, but after the Battle of the Boyne, he went to Mass there, and that's the last recorded Mass.
That's unreal that James II rested there after
the battle. Right. But the Ansleys family that's mentioned in it, they're the Ansleys. Robert Louis Stevenson's book, Kidnapped, is based on Jimmy Ansley, a member of the Ansley family who would have lived in that house because they were from outside the town of New Ross. This was their townhouse, so he would have been in and out here. But he was kidnapped by his uncle and sent into indentured slavery in America. And Robert Louis Stevenson based his book Kidnapped on that man's story. Right. 18th century story. So we have, in that building there, we have the founder of the Pioneers, James II, and Jimmy Ansley and Robert Louis Stevenson all wrapped up in one. It's phenomenal. We have another relic of our God's time. Dates from around the 1860s. Elizabethan or Victorian era mailbox called a penfold hexagonal. And as I understand it, there's only 2 of those in operation in the country now, or sorry, in Ireland now. This one is still in operation, daily basis. And I believe the other operational one is in Stormont. I think there's a number of them in museums, but I've been told that this is the only operational one in the Republic. I'm open to correction on it. And this is roughly the site of William Marshall's original bridge, the wooden bridge that went across here, and that would have been the medieval route up into Kells and on to Kilkenny to his headquarters. But the main highway, the commercial highway into the heartland of Leinster, was the river. You had the big ships coming up here, unloading and unloading, and the smaller draft boats coming down the river there, down the Nore and the Barrow, to New Ross to deliver and collect whatever they were exchanging. And that bridge, the Michael O'Hanrahan Bridge, was opened in 1967.
I didn't realise that bridge was called the Myles Courtney Bridge. I didn't know that.
Well, that's the 7th bridge of New Ross. One of them was built by Cromwell.
Was it?
Yeah, but when Cromwell arrived here in 1849, the town surrendered to him, but there was no bridge here, so the garrison had skedaddled across the river and headed on to Kilkenny, but he had to stay to recover from what they call the Irish sickness. Himself and the army were absolutely riddled with dysentery, but he stayed here. But to get his army across the river, he had to build a pontoon bridge. Now, a pontoon bridge going across a river that wide at the time was such a significant feature that it was retained as one of the 7 bridges of New Ross. Now, granted, as soon as he'd finished and got his army across, he was no idiot, he demolished it in case he'd be followed.
Right.
So, like, there's hardly a day goes by now that when you're passing here, you wouldn't see somebody shaking his hand. You know, the Kennedys were the poster boys of Irish emigration, if I could phrase it that way. And it's something that New Ross is very proud of. And like we continue to cherish it. So for a lot of people, be it from America or elsewhere, can identify with the emigration story. And the Kennedys epitomise the success of it from here. But he's not the only famous American connection here with New Ross, and I'll show you that again as we just go down a little bit further here before we finish up. This is the spot where 1963 John F. Kennedy spoke to the people of New Ross. The script of his speech is here on the lectern, and a lot of people, visitors, especially people from the Boston and Massachusetts area, will read it out in their local twang. But anybody who reads it will see that there's nothing formal about it. Like, it's a speech, or a speech that somebody would make on a homecoming. You know, it's very, very, very informal. And it went down well with the locals. Like, he refers that if Patrick Kennedy hadn't left, perhaps he would be still here working for John V. Kelly, which is a pub right there on the corner in that building. Or he said for working in the Albatross Company, which, well, the Albatross factory is now gone, but that was across there right behind his shoulder, like he couldn't miss it at the time. So he made those colloquial references, and it went down, went down well with the locals. So it was more a homecoming than a presidential visit. And if you listen to him chatting and meeting people and having the tea, so to speak, out in Dunganstown, you know, so